Hi, I'm Charlie Cook. I want to echo Amy Walters' remarks a little while ago. We're all at the Cook Clerk Report. We're all really excited about being able to about co-hosting this event with the University of Chicago, the Institute of Politics, and of course with David Axelrod. I'm really excited about this particular panel because I've known and admired Ann Selzer for a really long time, and you know, she's developed, I mean, she's famous because of the Des Moines Register poll, but Ann's polled everywhere. And back in the day when Bloomberg News did a lot of national polling, that was Ann's. But it's really the Register poll that put her on the map, and most specifically was when she showed in the very last poll before the 2008 Iowa caucus, when everybody else was saying, you know, too close to call, and Ann just nailed it. And I have a little bit of a confession to make. This past fall, you know, every pollster, and you know, a heck of a lot of the people here are pollsters on this call. You know, every pollster is going to get one wrong. I mean, it's just a matter of time. It's going to happen to everybody. You know, 1 in 20 is going to be as if you interviewed people on a different planet. You know, I get that. So last fall, it was October 31st when the Register released their last poll before this election, and it showed President Trump ahead by 7 points, 48-41, and Joni Ernst had been was up by 4, and that had been, you know, really close before. I thought, well, you know, Ann's fabulous, but she just hit her 1 in 20. And, you know, I hope, she, you know, and I felt for her. And then election day occurred. Damn, she nailed it again. And so now there is a reason, I think, why 538 suggested back in 2016, Ann Selzer is the best pollster in politics. That she's not going to get an argument from me on this. So we're really excited to have Ann on. And if someone what was I going to say, and if someone said, you know, Ann, you know Iowa like the back of your hand, of course, you know, can you do this someplace else? And I know the answer, but why don't you help them? Because there is no dominant state pollster in America the way you dominate there. I mean, Burr Field back in the day in California, but so how do you do it away games, Ann?
Well, thank you, Charlie, for that lovely introduction, and it's good to see you. And thank you to the Institute of Politics for hosting this. Been thinking about this for a while. I have had to answer a lot of questions that I think are well-meaning, like, well, she just knows Iowa, or she, you know, couldn't we get an Ann Selzer in every state, and then all of the state polling would be good? And I take that as a compliment, but there's nothing really in my method that is Iowa specific. That is, when we poll in other states, we're not preparing really intellectually in any sort of different way. We're gathering the same data to use as we're going to weight our findings, and we're thinking about how, you know, just the standard things you think about. And I've done, as you mentioned, I've done other kinds of polling, and permit me, I'm going to share my screen for just a moment and give a little bit of background. Starting in 2006, we were doing the Michigan poll for the Detroit Free Press. And you can just kind of look at the margins here of our final poll, and then what the actual margin is. And I heard people say, don't look at the margins, but we were very close. In Indiana, we were also polling that year. We got the Obama win, saying it would be a 1-point victory, if that. And George W. Bush had won by 19 points the previous election. So in fact, I'm the proudest of the work we did in Indiana, and showing Mitch Daniels for governor, different party, with a handy win. So being able to pick that up. I think we have a couple more here for going through the years with the Iowa poll, where you can just kind of see our margins have been very close to what the actual turnout has been. Our Bloomberg Politics poll, within 1 point of what that turned out to be. And then the 2020 presidential, this is real clear politics. I'm sure it's familiar to everybody here. And you can see that their average was, a 2-point average. And you can see there were polls showing Biden leading. So we were an outlier, which is why you thought I might be washed up at long last. And the Ernst poll, you can see again, a lot of polls, these are the final polls just leading up there that were showing that. And I put in this little reminder so I would remember to stop sharing my screen. So there really is nothing that I'm doing in my polling that shouldn't work in other places there, and has.
Well, Ann, what's the secret sauce? I mean, what are you doing that's different from a lot of these folks that may not have hit it quite so right?
Yeah, and I've landed on a terminology to explain ways in which I may be different, because people ask me this question all along, and there was an article that was published saying Ann Selzer has a secret sauce, and I'm going, what is it? Because we publish our methodology, there's nothing secret, and I don't know that there's anything saucy about it. But I've landed on calling my approach polling forward. That is, my method is designed and devised such that my data will reveal to me what is coming in the election as it plays out. I don't make assumptions about what I hear some pollsters refer to as the size and shape of the electorate. When they say it, I'm not really sure I can visualize the mechanics of what they're talking about. And they say that's the hard part of polling. And sort of my initial response is to say, it's so hard, why would you try? Why not let your data show you the size and the shape of the coming electorate? And, I'll mention in 2016, when we were doing national polls, we were showing that there was going to be a downturn in Black voters. And I had people telling me that that was preposterous, that no one believed that that was true. And I recall, I think it was Cornell Belcher, and I might not be correct, I don't know Cornell, but I paid close attention because he said in his polling he was seeing the same thing. And that turned out to be the case. So I'm at a little bit of a loss for the details of how one would go about deciding based on science what a future electorate might look like.
And is there any particular language that you use to kind of pull this out of people? I mean, if somebody looked at your questionnaire and compared it to another, is it there, or is it after the data is already collected?
It's before the data are collected, actually, Charlie. There's no,
Example.
I think every pollster is probably doing some version of George Gallup, a good Iowan, what he initially asked, and how, if the election were today, how likely is it that you would vote, and for whom would you vote? And I cannot tell you that we go deeper into assessing the intensity of that vote and including that in anything other than the reporters' stories about it. But I want to tell you how I came to this. And it's a story that's been told a lot of times, so I'll cut it a little bit short. Our 2008 caucus poll, which you referenced, part of that poll asked whether this would be your first caucus or whether you had caucused in the past. And our poll said 60% would be first-time caucus goers. And that is a jaw-dropping number. I mean, you talk about a finding that nobody could believe that would be true. And, I could take you through a TikTok of what happened after that poll was published, but the entrance poll, when that caucus night finally came, said 57% of the people who showed up on the Democratic side were first-time caucus goers. Oh, and Obama's margin was about what we said it was going to be. And I learned that the Hillary Clinton campaign, again, this is her first, and maybe other campaigns in that cycle had decided, and I use that word with emphasis, to focus their effort on previous caucus goers and registered Democrats, that their judgment was that would make up the overwhelming majority of caucus goers on caucus night. I learned that the Obama campaign knew that if that's who was going to show up, they would lose. So they went out and began cultivating first-time caucus goers. So the Clinton campaign, again, other campaign, Edwards campaign perhaps as well, were blind-sided, an emphasis on the blind. They weren't looking for first-time caucus goers, so their method had basically prevented them from seeing that something new was happening. And I was criticized before the actual caucus night that I had been assuming and I had been presuming, and that, again, I was kind of taken aback because the idea that I had decided that the right number of first-time caucus goers would be in the 60% range. I don't know how anybody could ever decide such a thing. But I had a method that showed me what the dynamics were that were taking shape in the electorate. And then there's a matter of, do you trust your data? But it taught me that I was different, and it solidified, I'm going to say, my faith, if you want to call it that, in a method that would put me in the place of seeing the electorate coming toward me rather than making assumptions and making presumptions.
Would the other pollsters have built a sample that would just be oriented more towards traditional second, third time caucus goers, or would they take the data and just weight it? And if they had a 60% first time, say, well, shoot, and weight those down to some magic number. Yeah. Where do you think they would go astray?
Well, I'll mention that my client, the Des Moines Register, and many people here know David Yepsen in particular, were highly suspicious of the data. And we ran some scenario tests, but basically showing it was a pretty robust finding. And so it wasn't questioned as to whether it would be published. But when I go looking, and sometimes it's an archaeological excavation to find the method statements for, all of the polls I can get my hands on, not all, but many polls. I see elements that raise red flags that are the pollsters are relying on something that happened in the past. So I call that, and I mean it with, I think, as much respect as I can muster, polling backward. And I understand the temptation that you take a look at past elections and you can run some regression equations. You can identify a set of variables that predict the election outcome. And that becomes the basis for how the data are collected and weighted, how likely voters are defined. But it's based on the past. So it's predictive of a past behavior. And in social science, it's common to say the best predictor of future behavior is past behavior. But I've added the Selzer caveat, until there is change. Because if you're looking backward, you're going to miss a freight train that might be coming right at you.
Well, I guess after you have a midterm election with the highest turnout since 1914, then when you have a presidential 2 years later with the highest in 120 years since 1900, it would say don't wait and pass. Now, you and I talked about a week or so ago, and I don't want to give anything away, but you seem to have some things you wanted to share, but you promised to be polite. So.
I do want to put a couple of things on the table to be thought about that kind of flushes out what I'm talking about here. And first, I've mentioned that past election outcomes in any sort of weighting scheme might be problematic, that you're weighting to something that happened in the past. It could blind you from something new that's taking shape in the future electorate. And I'll add that I've also seen some polls that are weighting, they're only going after likely voters, and then weighting using exit poll data as a way to get the demographics into an order that they like. And again, they're weighting to a past election with the assumption that that will apply to a future electorate. I think that's what they're doing to adjust the shape of the electorate. And both of those things, again, have the fundamental assumption that the future election is going to be just like the past election in terms of the demography and probably other sorts of things there too. Second, I want to mention the use of registered voters as the meaningful universe, and that some are using voter lists as their sample frame. And I understand that there are reasons that make that a compelling choice. Some just say early, especially in an election cycle, who knows who's really a likely voter. So it's just too fluid, and they want to be able to compare over time. And so it sort of makes some sense. I can share with you from the Iowa side. Iowa has the good fortune that our Secretary of State gathers good data and turns it around very quickly and publishes it. And not every state has partisan registration as Iowa does. But if you look at the way people are registered, and this is updated as of the 2020 election, it's about evenly divided between Democrats, Republicans, and no party affiliation there. If you look at the people who actually voted in the 2020 election, what you see is that Republicans show a disproportionate record of voting. And I'll say these are in percentage form, but these are hard numbers. There is no margin of error on these numbers. And so if you make your sample, your respondent base, look like the way people are registered, you are going to underestimate the Republican vote. And I've seen that consistently, that there's a difference between people who are registered and people who vote. And the demographics that are in the gap between tend to tilt toward more Democratic voters. And you can see here, Democrats as proportionately likely, but especially if you're relying on independents as your margin of victory, you're going to overrepresent again what's happening with the horse race between the Republicans and the Democrats. And just also keep in mind that there are states like Iowa that have same-day registration. So one of the things I think about is who are you including and who are you excluding? And so if you're working off an existing voter registration list, you're going to exclude all of those people who've not yet registered to vote. So that's something there. Third, I want to raise the issue of creating a likely voter model. And I wish I knew more about it. And you've heard several of the speakers today talk about it. And I wish, again, I had a clear vision in my brain about the mechanism for what they're doing. And maybe it's proprietary, but you get the idea that there's judgment and, dare I say, guessing going on. And some methods, as they're saying that they use a likely voter model, will say, well, we have this many years in the polling industry, or we consult with university faculty, which doesn't tell me how they're doing it. How do they decide? But I sort of hear in it that there's, and maybe it's purely a matter of having modeled a past electorate and then putting that forward. And then the last thing I just want to put on the table is, and it's related, is some pollsters' use of propensity scores. And that is, some respondents get a higher score if they voted in a lot of elections, and they might get a lower score if they don't know where their precinct is or admit they're not really following the election all that closely. So some respondents get more weight in calculating the vote questions, and some are discounted. And my observation is that money in campaigns has altered the ability to predict a particular respondent's likelihood of voting. If you're just taking account, for example, their interest, that the more interested respondents are, it makes sense that the greater is the likelihood that they will vote. But I've heard of campaigns that, and this is the 2012 Obama campaign, that once they identified somebody was a likely Obama voter, they were relentless in calling them up and knocking on their door until they could get an absentee ballot into their hands and get that ballot returned. And you'd think they might be done. But after that, they would work to convert that person's friends and get that person to go and take people to the polls. There was money to do that kind of thing. So you didn't have to rely on other indicators of whether a person was likely to vote, because they just rode roughshod over any of that. So the idea that you can determine a continuum of voting likelihood based on things like interest and whether they know where their precinct is and what their past has been in polling before that's making a pretty strong assumption. And given that things have really changed in terms of voter interest and also with campaign tactics.
In 5 minutes, we're supposed to open it up to other people. So I'm going to take the prerogative. So I've got two questions. One is a 2020 related and one's more methodological. In terms of 2020, with what you were saying a little while ago, you said that basically Republicans were getting underrepresented, comparing who really did vote, according to the Iowa Secretary of State, versus what polling was showing. Now, when you saw that Republicans were being undersampled, what did you see any specific kind of Republican that seemed to be undersampled? I mean, was it a Republican that lived south of Grand and the fanciest part? I think it's the fanciest part of Des Moines with really big houses, or were they more out, rural, small town? I mean, who were these people that were missing in these polls, but they sure as hell did show up, stipulating that they were both Republicans?
Well, my point isn't that you can go to the voter list at this point and get that all worked out. What we know is that Republicans voted in larger numbers than they were represented in that database. So if you are using that database as your sample frame and you're adjusting it to make sure that your party distribution looks like the overall the universe that comprises your sample frame, then you've made an error in doing that. And the error is of judgment in saying that the way people are registered is the way they will turn out. And that's more my point, that we know who's being missed. And of course, I didn't know that this is the way things were in 2020. We'd seen the same thing in 2016. And in particular, the analysis we did there, which wasn't terribly in-depth, but that there was a drop in turnout among Democrats compared to 2012, and in particular with Democratic men. And having seen that afterwards, it just kind of alerts you to pay attention to the idea that that things are not set in stone, things change. And if you lock yourself into a methodology that's based on what has happened in the past, you're preventing yourself from observing and then, kind of banking on the things that are coming in the future that would be different. And I want to say one more thing. So before you go to questions, let me just say one more thing. And that is, I think the discomfort that I might be expressing about what some pollsters are doing, I feel it myself. Polling is getting harder and harder and harder. In the old days, when they used to go door to door, even the early days of telephone interviewing, if we knew your phone number, we pretty much knew where you lived. And everything that has happened technologically since then has eroded that and made it all the more difficult. It's really kind of a miracle we're able to be accurate at this place at all. But what I'm doing is taking a look at the very basic steps of conducting a poll and thinking about, well, when I make this decision to go this direction, who am I including that I shouldn't? And who am I excluding that I shouldn't? Because every step, when you're deciding on what's your meaningful universe, whether that's likely voters or registered voters, when you're deciding on the sample frame, the mechanism you're going to use to reach your meaningful universe, whether that's RDD or voter lists or voter panels, you're including and you're excluding at the same time. And the same goes with how you're defining what a likely voter is and how you're weighting your data that everybody, I believe, wants to take their best shot at reflecting this future electorate. But it's, I'm pausing to reckon myself with what it is that needs to be part of our methodology going forward.
Actually, that led into the last thing I was going to ask is that in the earlier panel with Tony Fabrizio and John Anzalone, which I think, by the way, is the first time they've appeared together since the election, the two pollsters. So that's pretty cool. But there was a lot of talk about multimodal and introducing some kind of a text base mixed in with different types of reaching respondents. What are you looking at? What have you played with? What are you thinking about? And not that you'd tell me, but what are you going to pitch the register on next time?
Well, I will tell you, I think all of this makes a whole lot of sense, except I don't remember if it was which of the two pollsters it was who said that it gets tricky when you're trying to figure out how you're going to put these multi-modes together. What's the right percentage of people that you've contacted via text and then brought them to the web? You know, one of the little tenets I have in my head, and when I'm talking to students or when I'm talking to clients, and they just say, well, we need to throw in this, and we need to throw in this, and we need to take a look at this, and why can't we do this? I go, you know, just because you put all the right ingredients in a bowl, it doesn't mean you're going to end up with a cake. That is, there's science to the ratios. There's this much this, and there's this much this, and there's this much this. And we're guided in some very fine work that is done to identify what the cell-only population is, the landline-only population, and the mixed. And so we're able to guide and set some quotas for our phone bank and saying, okay, this is the mix that we need. When you add into that an overlay of people you're reaching through some other method, that makes me start to worry about how do you know what the right answer is? What assumption are you making?
If I'm looking weird, I'm trying to read these things off the chat box. From Adam Zabnar, who is a IOP student, did something change in Iowa in October, or was it more the way the polls showed Iowa so close, reflective of, well, you've sort of already talked about the methodological, but what did you sense something happen from your previous survey in September to the end of October?
Yeah, it's a really good question, and I can only speculate. You can hear in my voice I don't like speculating, but this was in a new rise of COVID outbreak here in Iowa. And there was a really strong push on the Democratic side to get absentee votes cast. And so if I look at the arc of their campaign, I'm going to say it crested sooner than Election Day. And so it was falling off by Election Day. And the Republican push was to get people to show up on Election Day. So their curve was later, if you will. So that when Election Day came, there might have been people who said, well, I didn't get my absentee vote in, but I went by my polling place and there wasn't a long line. It didn't look unsafe to me. And more people may have voted on Election Day than had predicted that they were going to vote at all. It ended up being more convenient than they could. It's a theory.
Now, this next question is from Elena Fishman from the DCCC, who asked, have you gone back to look at your survey respondents afterwards, basically asking, have you gone back to validate who said they were going to vote and who really did?
Yeah.
And because we are seeing that's happening more and more.
We have not done that, but I can tell you with some confidence, without having done it, that we polled some people who did not end up voting. And there were people who ended up voting. Well, that's obvious that we're not going to poll everybody that's there. The trick, when you have a method that has worked for as long as this has worked for me, is that and I'm guilty of it, that I can kind of rationalize that whoever it is I've missed, it's like they've got a doppelganger and there's somebody that I picked up, that they balance each other out. So it's the same with people who say, I never answer any public opinion polls. So your poll can't possibly be correct because I don't answer polls. And I say, well, for every one of you who won't do it, there appears to be an equal person who is willing to step up. It's just hard to fathom that polls can be accurate, given everything that's going so far against them. But they obviously can be accurate, even with all of those flaws mixed in.
Paul Lavanda, anyway, a data scientist at Spotify. How cool is that? How can a pollster avoid guessing what the electorate is going to look like as long as response rates are not uniform across various subgroups? That was his question.
Right. Well, I don't, so response rates are one problem, and I don't know that I can go into that detail. The likelihood of showing up also differs by demographics. Our approach has been, and this, I'm not alone in this, is that when we get you on the phone, we're going to collect basic demographic data so that regardless of whether you turn out to be a likely voter in our definition or not, we have demographics for a general election sample, and we wait to the census for those elements, and then we extract the likely voters from that. So we're balancing everything at the population level, and then if your demographic is more likely to vote, you're going to show up disproportionately in our likely voter sample, and vice versa.
Now I'm going to ask you a question that we haven't. What did you hear earlier that sort of surprised you the most?
You mean earlier today?
Yeah. Oh, I'm sorry. Yes.
You know, I heard these things that I've heard many times. That people are worried that they don't have the right analytics, or they don't know, you know, they're not getting it right. The mistake they made was underestimating that the turnout would be so much higher. Or they're, you know, I'm just sort of looking at the notes that I made here. I think somebody was asked, how did you make the right adjustments to be sure you had the right people in your samples? And I hear that conversation, and I think, how do you try? How do you not let your data show you? And again, I've got a track record of being able to see, well, look, the Black vote seems to be declining after 2012. And it made intuitive sense to me that 2016 didn't feel like a similar election to 2012 or 2008. So it's easier for me to trust my data when I see it. And it could be that there are other pollsters who go, well, that can't be right. And then set about to adjust it. Again, one of my tenets is, to the best that I can, is keep my dirty fingers off my data. That is, let my data not reflect my idea of what's happening in the future. Let my data inform me.
Now here's a question from someone you may know, Andrew Ball from Iowa PBS.
Andrew Ball, yeah.
And did you see signs of what John Anzalone said earlier, for that the pandemic led to higher response rates and with voters staying home over the summer? And if so, how did that impact your data? And I'll just throw in, I remember I had to talk to a couple of pollsters last summer. In fact, one of them was one of McIntyre's partners, who said they were having problems getting people off the phone. I mean, people were stuck at home and they wanted to talk to somebody or wanted to sort of, vent or something. Did you see any weirdness happen like that, or that would have affected interviewing?
We were looking for it, and we were doing some private polling as well as the public polling. And I asked about response rates, and yes, our response rates got a little better, but when they're terrible, it's hard to say that they were overwhelmingly better. The thing that we found is that we could do some daytime calling, which normally we poll from 5 until 9 in the evening. But people, because they were under stay-at-home orders, were available and not necessarily unwilling. And so we picked up a little bit on it that way, but I can't tell you that we said it's going to be an avalanche, but it's hard to see that in polling data.
Yeah. I'm just looking to see if there are any new ones that we haven't really. Okay, here's one, and I'll read it as we go. David Kanevetsky. While you said you don't make assumptions on what the electorate will look like, how do you account for differential partisan non-response rates, where one party's candidate or the other supporters just may be more likely to respond to surveys?
Well, I don't know that I have any data that would show that that's happening. So that may be happening in some polls. I cannot tell you that I would know, and maybe the questioner has some idea with specificity what you would go looking for that. So, and maybe they're sort of speaking to the shy Trump voter idea. And again, I've done dozens of focus groups with Trump voters over the years, and I've not found many to be terribly shy. And in fact, they're well aware that their preferred candidate loves polls that are good for him. So if anything, there would be incentive not to be shy, but to participate more. So I think that's just a matter of conjecture that happens. And then there might be some underlying methodological reason that some polls are picking up a differential. I don't know.
Yeah, I think of some relatives I had that were Trump supporters that you kind of knew about it pretty quickly. They were not shy about it at all. Well, tomorrow morning we kick off at 10:15 Eastern, 9:15 Central. It's a panel that's labeled polling the down ballot, but I guess down is relative. It's House and Senate races, which as far as I'm concerned is pretty damn high. But Jessica Taylor, our Senate governor editor at Cook Political Report, is going to be leading that discussion with Brenda Gianni, who is a Republican pollster who does the work for Senate Minority Leader Mitch McConnell and a primary pollster for the Senate Leadership Fund, the big Republican super PAC, and has worked for the NRSC. And Brian Stryker, who is one of Tony Fabrizio's partners. They're going to talk about what was going on in terms of races down sort of below the presidential level. After that, we've got Lana Summers is moderating a panel on race, demographics, and the future electorate. And she's got a big panel that's got some really, really interesting insights to look at things. There's some little corners that don't get as much examination as they probably should. Then there's race, and finally methodology. That's where David Wasserman, our House editor, is going to be leading that conversation and looking at that panel. So we're really excited about tomorrow. But Ann, thank you so much for doing this. You're terrific. And I promise. Actually, I didn't go through David's panels. It's Cornell Belger, who I think you mentioned earlier, Nate Cohen, New York Times, Ashley Kersinger from the Kaiser Foundation, and David Shore. So we're really looking forward to all of this. But thank you, Ann, so much. And Ann, I promise I will keep all reservations that I ever have again about your numbers, because I'm burnt twice. It ain't gonna happen a third time. But thank you for doing that, and I'm sure I'll be back in Iowa before long.
Good, Charlie. It's always good to see you. Thank you.
Bye-bye.